Your Excellencies, colleagues, scholars, practitioners, and, well, I think we can all call us peace builders. Very warm welcome to this plenary session. War is failure. Failure in terms of protecting lives, protecting livelihoods, protecting the use of effectively using resources, and also to sustainability. War is always a failure, and prevention is and must be our principal responsibility. It's an honor on behalf of the Dag Hammarskjöld Foundation to host and moderate this session of the Regional Prevention and the New Agenda for Peace here at the 36th Annual Meeting of ACUNS. My name is Henrik Hammargren, and I am the Executive Director of the Dag Hammarskjöld Foundation, and I will moderate this hybrid format of discussion that will take place over the next hour. We will call on questions later in the session, and we also have online listeners and participants who can also submit their questions. With us for this discussion, and we really see it as a dialogue, we have 4 invited speakers. The current chair of the Peacebuilding Commission, Ivan Šimović. We also have with us Rosalind Akombe from the UN Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, serving at the Peacebuilding Support Office. The head of the EU delegation to the United Nations, Ambassador Olof Skog, should have been in this chair, but he will be with us on the video link. And we will hear also from Pernilla Rydén, who is the Secretary Director of the International Forum for Challenges for Peace Operations. We're all facing extremely dangerous and challenging times, we know that. And armed conflicts obscure what we all really should be focusing on, and that is meeting the SDGs and also addressing climate change. Us missing that target is actually making everything even more dangerous. Academic analysis of conflict trends tell us that we're getting off track, and that trend is actually rapidly increasing and getting worse. The Uppsala University Conflict Database gives us a very, very important picture to understand. In 2022, fatalities from organized violence increased with almost 100%. Compared to the previous year, and this makes 2022 the most deadly year since 1994, and that was an extreme year marked by the genocide in Rwanda. And no other comparison made there. But 2022 also registered a number of 82 non-state conflicts, and that's an increase from the previous 76 non-state conflicts in 21. Most of these are located in Africa, but that's also followed by the Americas. The increase was driven by 2 main conflicts, the war in Ethiopia and the Russian invasion in Ukraine. And that invasion is the first large-scale international war in 20 years. And it's actually also the first interstate armed conflict since the World War II where a major power of the international system seeks territorial gains and the suppression of another state. So this is war with global implications on human and international and environmental security. We're also witnessing another trend, and it's very important to recognize, and that's an emerging trend of increased conflict between states, including major powers that are supporting one or more of the opposing side of the interstate conflict. And it's making them internationalized, and as we know from that, more difficult to actually deal with. Of the 55 state-based armed conflicts, 22 of them in 1922 were internationalized. So as these armed conflicts are getting increasingly regionalized with international implications, our methods of prevention remains inadequate, and that's a little bit what we're here to discuss today. This again, and to quote the Undersecretary General in her opening key statement, must be made a political and funding priority. And I think those two words pretty much sums it up. We must understand the political dimensions of this, and we must make it a priority when it comes to resourcing for this. But we also need to understand how this will be implemented at country level. We need renewed regional strategies to address the complexity that we're talking about here. The conflict environment, as we know, does not feel the national borders that we recognize. We can speak about terms of migration, refugee flows, terrorist activities, organized crime, but also let's not forget the effects that this has to accelerate the effects already implicated by climate change. When we talk about prevention, there are important things to recognize when it comes to the policy structures. Of course, prevention is at the key of the UN Charter, but it's also recognized in a number of key policy documents. We can see it in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which highlights the importance of partnership in Goal 17, and also in 16.6, if you know your global goals, to develop effective and accountable, transparent institution at all levels. We have the more recent also developments of the parallel resolutions on sustaining peace, also adopted in 2015, but also complemented with other resolutions, providing specific guidance. I'll come back to that in a second. We have the resolutions of women, peace and security, youth, peace and security, and also very important complementary policy methodology developed in, for instance, the World Bank pathways, UN World Bank pathways for peace study. So this sets a very efficient framework. So it's very much in the implementation of these. I just want to underline a couple of things where we specifically can look at sort of the details that we will discuss, and that is partly on the Sustaining Peace resolution that actually identify regional and sub-regional organizations as, and I quote, sort of the important group to be convened by the Peace-Building Commission to provide information, improve coordination, and develop and share good practices in peace building. Second, also to be, where appropriate, in cooperation and coordination with the UN system on joint analysis and strategic planning in conflict-affected countries. Finally, on pooling resources to include regional actors in addition to banks and donors to maximize the impact of sustaining peace. The 2019 reform of the UN Peace Security Pillar also envisioned a single political operational structure under the Assistant Secretary Generals with regional responsibilities. They should have dual reporting lines under the Undersecretary Generals for Political Peace-Building Affairs and for peace operations. There was also a call for a surge in diplomacy for peace outlined in the reforms of 2019. So, this said, I'm just trying to frame a little bit of what is needed to guide us in the discussions that we will have. There are additional measures taken now as we move forward. The Secretary General, in preparing for the year to come, under the common agenda, has set in motion various initiatives. One of them was the High-Level Advisory Board, HLAB, which recently presented a report. This called for 6 transformational shifts, of which one of them was empowering effective, equitable collective security arrangements. And it's no surprise, of course, one of them makes a very strong statement on established collective security frameworks between the UN and regional organizations. The new agenda for peace that was introduced, not presented as the full details by the USG in the morning session, called for identified 4 different areas. One on the normative frameworks and principles. The second was on prevention, again. Regional organizations and frameworks were sort of viewed to create a vital role in creating trust in the multilateral system. New technologies were mentioned, but fourthly, we will also look into the mechanism for maintaining peace. And here, the USG made a special reference to the special political missions. So, starting the conversations now, I would be really interested in learning from our groups that the persons present, and we will also come back and join up with the EU through Ambassador Skog in a couple of seconds. But to start this conversation, just to frame this in a question or two, I think it's important to start with just a reflection on what developments and reform has taken place over the past few years, and how have they strengthened the way the UN engages in peace building and prevention with a regional perspective. How can we build on learning from these lessons? And also, how can the Peace Building Commission support UN leadership for peace building prevention at the regional level? So with that, I'd like to start to turn to you, Ivan Šimović. You're Croatia's permanent representative to the UN. You're also currently the chair of the Peace Building Commission. And you will today speak in your personal and national capacity. So just want to underline that. So from that, your own vantage point, please.
Thank you. Thank you.
I also just recognize that Olof Skog is now also joining us, so I will bring Ambassador Skog also up on the board here.
Thank you for allowing me to speak in my personal capacity. I will feel much more free to address sensitive issues in that way. I thank organizers for having me here at your annual meeting. It's quite an honor. Now, let me get to your assessment of the current global situation. I fully agree. The UN is at the breaking point. Challenges are numerous. I heard that from Rosemary DiCarlo, you heard this morning about New Agenda for Peace. It's hugely important stepping stone for the forthcoming intergovernmental deliberations. It's Secretary General's brief that is going to be released by the end of this month. But it will have a huge impact on incoming meetings already this September. Millennium Development, Sustainable Development Summit. It will be also a ministerial preparational meeting for the Summit on the Future, as well as a meeting of a Peace Building Commission on ministerial level. And in 2024, we have a Summit on the Future, which is really, in my view, the central happening that could help troubles we are facing. And finally, we are having in 2025 a review of peace building, which potentially is also hugely important. You mentioned that there will be various segments of Secretary General's brief on New Agenda for Peace. No matter how those elements are labeled, the central element of New Agenda for Peace is improved prevention. And this is exactly what we need. I think that Peace Building Commission that I'm currently chairing can contribute to the improved prevention. Peace Building Commission is a strange animal. It consists of representatives of the Security Council, Economic and Social Council, General Assembly, as well as major troop contributors to the UN, as well as financial contributors. It has, to quite an extent, a bridging role between different parts of the United Nations system. In Secretary General's Our Common Agenda, which was a frame for various policy briefs, including New Agenda for Peace, he envisaged strengthening of Peace-Building Commission. It was repeated in report you mentioned, High-Level Advisory Board on Multilateralism. Both of these documents also emphasize the importance of stronger links between Peace-Building Commission and international financial institutions. Today, as PBC chair, I was meeting with the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. So in what respects will be PBC strengthening? It will be strengthening the scope of its activities. It will be strengthening also, hopefully, its mandate. When you mention the regional aspect of conflict prevention, I would say, of course, it's important to engage with regional organizations. But also when UN approaches some disturbing situations, threatening with escalation, mass atrocities, problems, regional approach is hugely important. And PBC is already actively engaging in different regional framework. For example, this Friday we will have a meeting on Sahel. And of course, when dealing with Sahel, you have to be in close relations with ECOWAS. But we are dealing with Chad Basin, we are dealing with Central Asia, we are dealing with Pacific Islands. I do not want to exceed the time allotted to me, but I would like to mention a new challenging idea, and it's the idea of a sustainable peace network, which would, in addition to peace-building commission, include various relevant regional actors. We would be having our meetings once a year to discuss examples of good practices, cooperation. But in addition, we would always engage regional actors when addressing situations that are of concern and that are on the PBC agenda. I have a lot of other ideas how to strengthen PBC and what should be the PBC's role in New Agenda for Peace, but I'll save my ammunition for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And with that, we will definitely come back. I don't know if we should use that violent language, but probably in other forms here. Can I please turn to you, Rosalind? You serve in the UN, in the DPPA, and you are very much involved in the whole development of the New Agenda for Peace. We heard a few of the sort of core elements of this being presented by the USG today. Could you build a little bit more on that, and also from your own experience in working with peace building, what are the lessons learned that we could see, and how are they now taken forward? The regional dimension of this is absolutely key. At the same time, what is a region today? We certainly have regional organizations covering them, but looking at some of these conflicts, they also extend far beyond sort of the region as we normally think about them. But I'll leave it to you to make a couple of reflections, and we'll come back later, but please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Henrik, and always a pleasure listening to Ambassador, who's really brought a lot of life and new innovations in the way the Peace Building Commission is working. So we really appreciate your leadership on that and agree with everything that you have said. And really thanks to ACUNS and USIP for inviting us here. We deeply appreciate. Henrik, I'll disappoint the participants because I'm not going to go beyond what my boss said when it comes to the new agenda for peace in terms of the details of actually what is in that report until the Secretary General releases it. Otherwise, I will lose my job, and I really, really enjoy my job. So I'll try to maybe focus on some of the things that we think are crucial, at least from the Department of Political and Peace Building Affairs, but focusing a lot more on the peace building side and trying to respond a little bit on the regional dimension, building actually on the reforms that the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has been putting in place since he came in. And maybe reflecting on maybe three areas in which I see how some of those reforms that the Secretary General has put in place and how actually they end up being reflected in the new agenda for peace, but what we've been doing actually to enhance them. I think the first was the big shift from us looking at issues from only a national perspective to recognizing that the sort of challenges we face are so cross-border that we cannot just come up with national plans, but also look at the regional aspect to it. You know, many of us who've worked in the organization remember how it was difficult to start developing the regional prevention strategies that the Secretary General wanted us to do on the Horn of Africa and other parts, because that's not how we are structured. That is not how we are created to think. So I think that was a fundamental shift in terms of just understanding from the analytical part that some of these issues that we deal with are cross-border. And I think you're seeing more and more of that being taken up by different agencies, by different departments. And I think you will see that still highlighted, obviously, in the new agenda for peace because of the sort of the nature of conflict that we're dealing with and the importance then of ensuring that we are taking regional approaches to some of the things, because how else can you address the Lake Chad Basin issues? How else can you address the Sahel issues? How else do you deal with issues that are taking place in parts of Europe, if you are not looking at it from a regional angle, or Central Asia in that case, especially when you're looking at water management? So I think for us, that lens, using a regional lens, using a cross-border lens at looking at these issues has been fundamental. I think the second is really looking at how we are then structured to respond to that. And I think, Henrik, you alluded to some of those structural changes in our institution itself, and I think I saw my colleagues around there, Oliver and others, who work in on peace operations, and how being together within the peace and security pillar and seeing ourselves within that identity of being part and parcel of one peace and security pillar, where we see the different things, whether they are peacekeeping missions, and I know that we'll hear more about that later, but whether you're looking at peacekeeping operations, or you're looking at special political missions, or you're looking at the special good offices, you're looking at them as a continuum, that there are different tools that will be required for different purposes. So kind of shifting the discussions from being, where we do a champagne bottle up because we've managed to win, and in country X we have a peacekeeping mission instead of a special political mission, for us to see that these are tools that can be used across the board, and seeing ourselves internally as a pillar that uses all these different tools. So for me, that's the second shift that has been fundamental in how we actually work on peace and security issues. I think the third that has been really fundamental also is looking at not just the peace and security side, but looking at the cross-pillar work and understanding the structural reasons why countries get into conflict, where Pathways for Peace that we worked with the World Bank was fundamental, but looking at how we've invested in building up the capacities that we have for skill sets that look at the peace and security side, but also look at the development side. And we have Grace and other colleagues here who are peace and development advisors who cross that bridge of bringing together the structural prevention part of our work and the peace and security responses that you're going to bring in. And in my role, obviously, in the Peace Building Support Office, I work very closely with agencies, funds, and programs to make sure that we are not forgetting the development aspects of our work, because as Rosemary DiCarlo said in the morning, development, sustainable development, and peace are linked in a very intricate way. And so for us, those are the three fundamental things that we see. And regional organizations then become absolutely important. I have served with the African Union, and I know how much, the African Union feels an ownership of issues that are happening in the African continent and would want to be involved. And I think we've developed strong partnership as the UN with the African Union. I think we have a presence now. I think I can say that, I think I see my colleagues from the Policy and Mediation Division here of DPPA, they can confirm, but we have a presence, at least, it might not be a big office, but the United Nations now has a presence in almost all the regional organizations, whether we are talking about ASEAN, or whether we are talking about the Shanghai Cooperation, or whether it's the African Union, or is the European Union. There is a presence, physical presence in those places, because we acknowledge the critical role that regional organizations play and why we need to partner very closely with them. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosalind. And at this stage, I would like us to switch and invite Ambassador Olof Skog, the representative by the EU to the United Nations, to join us on the main screen, if we can make that switch happen. Here he is. Welcome, Olof. You will have difficulty seeing the room, but it's a quite full room that we have, and it's a keen interest to learn more. The European Union is a long-standing member, and I'm glad to hear this it's absolutely important to have these institutionalized arrangements, as Rosalind was pointing to. Not only that, there's a lot of the funding arrangements. The EU provides a quarter of the budget to, and its member states, I should say, a quarter to the budget to the UN, and also to peacekeeping. So it is essential relationship. I also want to, before letting you in, Ambassador, just say that our ambition was to have Fatima Mohammed, the permanent representative by the African Union to the UN, also present with us, and she sends her regards, so she was called off to do things that she simply couldn't change. So, Olof, may I please turn to you and ask, what, from your perspectives, what can be learned from this institutionalized development between the UN and the EU? And you've seen it from both sides, having also served as Swedish PR to the UN. But we're over to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, good afternoon from New York. I regret I can't be there. It looks like I see the stage, and it looks like a wonderful setting. So I have my regrets. I came a little bit late into the seminar, and I'll explain why in a minute. But first, I understand, Henrik, listening from the other comments, that you have probably asked us to speak freely and disregard what our bosses may feel. My problem is that I have bosses in Brussels, and I have 27 member states who are watching over my shoulder wherever I go, whatever I say. But I'm coming to the end of my term in this job, so I'll what the heck? I'll offer some freewheeling thoughts of my own. First, yes, I have to say that I just came from a very interesting thing that happened right now, a few minutes ago, right outside the Security Council. There was a joint stakeout to the media organized by Ghana, where a whole range of African countries who are united behind this Yaoundé code of conduct that deals with maritime security in the Gulf of Guinea, had asked us, as supporters of what they're doing, to join them in this stakeout talking to the media ahead of a meeting on the Security Council here at the UN. And I think it's just an excellent example of how a region, in this case around the Gulf of Guinea, comes together to agree on a code of conduct on how to deal with piracy and crimes on the high seas, which is a disastrous phenomena to their economies and many others. They need support to implement capacity building, etc. The EU is very active on that. And it's all in the setting of today a Security Council debate. So you have the region, the concentric circles of support from the outside, and sort of a UN framework that brings legitimacy to all of it. So I just want to mention that to start with. But that's a good example. But I think we need to be very much aware, as overwhelmed as the UN is, looking as it should for cooperation and relief, shall we say, in its task by pulling and delegating to the regional organizations, and we're happy to comply. I still think one has to understand very carefully how that division of labor also needs to be put in certain frameworks. It isn't just a question of looking positively at how regions react to this. It also has some problems, because let's not forget that the ultimate provider of legitimacy is the United Nations. And it's hard to replace that legitimacy. And we see it both in terms of peacekeeping and I think also in terms of mediation, that regional organizations may bring added value, but one has to be very cautious also about the vested interests that may lie in neighboring countries engaging too heavily in a country of fragility. Because of course, there are also cases where the region itself is, shall we say, not the best placed to do that mediation, given that some of the conflicts we see emerging are actually the result of power struggles playing out in the region itself. So I think, and take the example of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. I mean, the fact that we have very deliberately put the United Nations General Assembly at play to reject that invasion is precisely not to give any ideas for any major powers around the world that they are free to take a military solution to a problem that they may see in their neighboring countries without any legitimacy. So the fact that there needs to be a framing around the UN Charter and the UN to give the ultimate legitimacy for all these kind of things is very important. When I chaired the presided of the Security Council a few years ago, I always made a point of whenever a mediator, an envoy or a special representative of the UN was in town, that I would go out to the media and stand behind her or him in order to manifest the fact that the Security Council was backing his or her efforts on the ground. And I think, again, now this is whoever represents mediation is strengthened in their task if they can claim that the UN is behind them. It's true that since those good years, things have gone sour, and the Security Council has great trouble right now coming together because of the geopolitical tensions that are there. I would argue that that's the case for the Secretary General and the good officers of the UN to be even more active, to replace the void that is otherwise out there. I'm not entirely happy about the fact that the UN is not the lead in terms of negotiating a ceasefire in Sudan, for instance. I think all of us would feel more safe if the UN prominence in some of these ongoing conflicts, Libya, etc., were more more prominent. So I think there's something to be said about all that. In any case, I think having said all that, I still think there's a lot to be done, a lot to be said about this regional organization stepping up and doing more to assist the UN, as long as it can be claimed to be on behalf of the UN or to provide that it's backed up by the kind of legitimacy that I just mentioned. One example of how this is being played out is actually Cyprus, a very complicated, long-standing situation, as we all know, where Cyprus, as being part of the European Union, we have acknowledged that a solution to the Cyprus situation has to be done through the United Nations and based on the Security Council resolutions that are there. So the EU role is one of really supporting the UN effort. I think we are absolutely key and fundamental to any solution because of what the economic benefits of a united Cyprus can benefit from. as members of the EU. But again, there's a carefully crafted division of labor here that I think is, well, it hasn't been totally successful yet, but I think that's the kind of situation that others could be modeled around. I think as we look at peacekeeping, we have the Somalia situation where the African Union has been contributing heavily in a robust way that I think a normal UN peacekeeping operation would not have mastered. And right now there's a very interesting discussion going on where we very much support that in a situation like the one in Somalia, where the AU is putting their troops forward, it could be well done through a UN mandate, but then we also need to be ready to finance through the UN budget that kind of a peacekeeping operation. Of course, in return, we would expect that the operation itself follows a certain framework of respect to human rights, international law, and all of that, as part of the legitimacy that it brings, being backed up by the United Nations. So we see that happening. Now, finally, maybe on prevention. And here I really see a key role for the region. And I think maybe, again, the EU is a pretty good example of where we have come together and tied our fates economically, socially, culturally together in the EU in a very, very strong cooperation that makes basically war impossible between the countries that are members of the European Union. And we try to build in the same kind of prevention agenda in the rigid criteria for new members that want to join. And I'm not saying that that is a model that would work for the rest of the world, but I think if we think about regional arrangement, regional organizations as ones that really ties the fates of people together, economically not least, in a way that they would, the cost of going to war or conflict becomes so high that it's just inconceivable. I think that should be the way we look at supporting regional corporations. Finally, on the upcoming meetings here at the high-level week, given the clear connection between development, social economic issues, and prevention, I think one of the main events, or maybe two of the main events this year, is really the SDG summit coming up in September. And also, of course, the whole climate situation, given how climate also affects peace and security. So I think we should see the new agenda for peace and all of that, super important ideas coming forward. But unless we resolve the social economic agenda and see that also as part of how we try to prevent conflict, we're not going to be able to accomplish all of this. And that leads me to what I think Ivan spoke about also, the strengthening of a new paradigm of prevention, where the Peacebuilding Commission has a very important role to play. An observation I've had for many years, and I'll end here, is that, in fragile country situations, ambassadors representing fragile countries here in the UN are sometimes instructed to make sure that the UN does not get involved because of the stigma, because of the risk of maybe ending up on the agenda of the Security Council, which is very difficult to then get away from, and the fact that it's seen as a compromise in their own sovereignty. I think that's the paradigm that we have to shift. Countries that really feel that they are undergoing fragility and the risk of conflict, etc., should feel that they could really benefit from the UN contribution in various ways. That's the paradigm we have to shift. And I think the Peacebuilding Commission is well placed and could be even better placed to play that role, because it works with the countries. It's not just, like the Security Council sometimes about those countries. I'll end here, Henrik, and thank you again for what the Dag Hammarskjöld Foundation is doing so importantly on these issues.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Skog. It's very, very interesting to hear your remarks. There's some applause here in the hall. So thank you both for being frank, but also underlining the complementarity between the regional organization and the UN, and actually serving the UN itself. I think it's an important point. Let's also come back to this how would this paradigm shift look like? Can we put these countries in the center? Let's also now, and I should have said that, if we would have Fatima Mohammed also representing us here now, we would hear also about very strong commitments between the African Union, of course, and the UN, and that was also manifested in the Secretary General's speech last year that called this a unique partnership that is actually a cornerstone of multilateralism. I want to place that here and in also recognition of the empty chair. We need to also include another dimension of this, and that goes back to the idea about the reforms introduced in 2019, about having a more, how should we put it, a seamless sort of interaction in this whole perspectives. We heard the USG when introducing sort of some of the frameworks here. She spoke a lot about the special political missions, but we have also a very important dimension of this that I'd like to turn to Pernilla Rudén to also make us a little bit more informed about. So in terms of advancing regional prevention within peace operations, if you could let us know a little bit about the reflections you have as the Secretary for the Challenges Forum, because I think there are very important elements of this. So please, Pernilla.
Can you hear me? Can you show that you are with me, because I'm the last of the speakers, so can you just wiggle? Oh, you are with me. I'm so happy. Grateful for being here. Thank you to ACUNS and thank you to Dag Hammarskjöld Foundation for organizing this. Actually, I'm not at the end of my term, but I'm still not worried to lose my job. So I will start by saying that I'm talking about peace operation in the broadest sense of the word, or the broadest definition, because I will stick out my neck here and say I think it's a bit of an artificial division to have peace operation and special political missions. I don't see why we have to divide them, but again, that's something that some people want to, or that UN is still doing, but I think going forward we could definitely skip this. But anyhow, before we set out to discuss how peace operation is effective in prevention, I wanted just to say something historically about peace operation. I mean, generally, we could think about it as a fire brigade. There is like, firefight is coming out when the fire has been put out, to be out there to make sure that there will not be a new flare-up of fires. So often peace operation comes in at a stage where you already have had a fire. Of course we can send out firefighters to ask and to tell people how to very, very organized not set fire to things. And it worked for some, but it will still be hard to make it work for everyone. So I think we still need to be very, very concerned and think of peace operation as an important tool in the UN. And we also have like an evolution when we say peace operation, even in the broadest term. We had when we started off the first UN peace operation that I will mention in just a few minutes, was very much, like a monitoring mission, and all the traditional missions were monitoring mission. Then we came to a situation where we had internal conflicts and conflicts between different armed groups in countries, as we also have today. But then we got to big multi-dimensional missions. And now I have put a question mark, because what will be the new type of peace operation going forward? And I would say, I think we can definitely scrap special political missions and peace operation division and just have missions to trying to help settle peace and agreement. Anyhow, if we just turn for 1 second to ANTSO, which is the oldest peace operation we have. It celebrates 75 years today. And we heard USD De Carlo talking about Volker Bernadotte being the first special envoy, right, before. But when we say, we can say, ANTSO was put there after 1948 to try to ensure that the parties to the conflict was abiding by the agreement, right? And then we could be very negative, but there was someone telling me in another session we should try to tell positive stories. So we could be negative and say, oh yeah, but it didn't work, right? Because we have had conflict in the Middle East, we have had conflict with Palestine and the Arab states after that. Yes, but is that ANTSO's fault? Or is it actually that the UN is trying to help the parties, but it is parties themselves who need to really want peace, right? So I think that, we can still see positively on peace operations, that even if they can't help escalate all long-term violence, I am really convinced that they do de-escalate violence both before, during, and after a conflict by the different methods they use. They will be, for example, sending messages between the parties. They will identify the tension and trying to address them. They will pass on sensitive messages between the parties, and they will try to assist what I would call changing perceptions, because it's sometimes very easy when you don't talk to the others to think that the others have a very strange idea of how things are, and then when you actually sit together and talk, you realize that your common goals aren't that different. And of course, as we have talked also about earlier today, and that Di Carlo talked about, was the importance of building trust and having trust and actually focusing on the part of trust. So anyhow, I'm not going to go deeper into that because we have to be cautious of time, but I wanted to say, now when we then talk about peace operation, we have different types of peace operation that actually do work on regional prevention. And I'll just give you some examples. So for example, we have those traditional monitoring missions that we were discussing about, like UNSO, Anfield, and Cyprus, as Olof Skog mentioned, and we have other places like that. But then we also have missions that have, for example, an office in a neighboring country to try to help curb, bilateral potential conflicts. We have, for example, UNMIC, which is the UN mission to Kosovo, where there is an office in Belgrade. We have the UN mission to Iraq, UNAMI, which has an office actually co-located with UNAMA in Tehran, in Iran, to try to iron out differences. And then we have this kind of situation that we have also talked about earlier today, where we have a peacekeeping or peace operation which is complemented by a special envoy. For example, we have a MONUSCO, which we will hear more about tomorrow when SRSG Bintu Keita will address us, where you have a special envoy for the Great Lakes who is supporting politically. And then we also have, for example, UNMAHA, which is the mission to Yemen, where we also have a special envoy for Yemen. So there are several different mechanisms to try to work on regional prevention. But still, there is things to try to highlight, and I will try to be brief. But while going forward, we need to really think about how to do this better, because there is no need to think that we can't improve. And I'm glad to hear about the Peace Building Commission and very eager to hear more about it. But if we just think about within the UN, one way of highlighting this going forward would be to have regional mandates. As Rosalind has mentioned, there is a lot of cross-border conflict. So to actually issue more regional mandates instead of having peacekeeping operations would have a national mandate. There needs also to be a bigger debate on how to deal with ad hoc regional security arrangement and how UN should relate to those. We can talk more about it later. I think we're also thinking that tailor-made observation missions, like the ones that we had before, which is more of observation, but in a new format, could be a way forward. We have also thought that having ad hoc expert missions or ad hoc expert teams helping out could be a very good thing. And we heard also Rosemarie Di Carlo speaking earlier today about the standby capacity for mediation, but we would like to see even an enhanced issue of that, saying that we could have peace processes support teams, and they could actually not normally only go to a mission, but they could also support a resident coordinator or a UN country team in a country that has a problem. So really trying to deal with the problem before we come to the point where we actually have to deploy a full-scale mission. And just a few words on regional. I think most of it has already been mentioned. I wanted to just say something about we need now to have norms be put into action, because a lot of normative framework, we have agreements, we have issues going on, as we have heard from others here today as well, but it still needs to be operationalized in a very active manner. And I mean, we think that regional the division between UN and regional organizations should be based on comparative advantages, and that we could maybe discuss more, because it's alluded a bit to what Ambassador Skog was saying, you know, who is doing what and when, because of course UN is still, you know, having the UN Charter, the main provider. But, and finally, as has also been mentioned both by Rosemary DiCarlo and others here today, that, you know, if we want to have African Union doing more missions, we need to really sort out the funding and have both adequate, reliable and sustainable funding of this operation. Otherwise, it becomes ad hoc issues, and I don't think that helps anyone. And finally, just to say that I think we should really also, I think Rosemary DiCarlo said it as well, we should use new technology, and we should really work on having more data-driven processes and create more early warning systems, and really work on having one UN where also resident coordinators and others can have a bigger role in early warnings. I stop there.
Thank you very much, Pernilla. And there's quite a lot there, and we have sort of lined up quite a number of issues. Are there anyone who would like to come in? I mean, Ambassador, you have already placed an issue that you already signaled you wanted to come back to. I can also imagine that Ambassador Skog, you know, some of the things that you heard now recently is something like you come back to. Anyone who would like to just start in commenting on this, please go ahead and.
You were right. You were right that I was looking with great interest and listening to that discussion on improvement of peace missions. I do not think that crucial is whether we call something peacekeeping or special political mission. It's very important that they are fit for the purpose. And I think that in this respect, we do have a missing link. You were talking about strengthening resident coordinators with some ad hoc teams. I'm having something else in mind, which I believe would be an important addition to New Agenda for Peace. I think that we need missions that are focused either on prevention, so acting early in situations that are deteriorating to the point that they threat with the escalation of conflict or even atrocity crimes, or that such missions that I will describe could be successors of classical peacekeeping missions. The classical peacekeeping missions are massive, hugely expensive. I think that their length could be shortened without fear of escalation if they are succeeded by light footprint civilian missions consisting of political advisors, human rights advisors, in some cases also climate change advisors, as well as some experienced experts in the area of strengthening of rule of law and security. I think that those missions should have a financial muscle. I think that they should have country ownership. So unlike Security Council, they are not just deployed whatever country wants. They should be based on countries' invitation in deteriorating situation. Now, why would country invite a mission? Does it harm its sovereignty? There needs to be a carrot. And that carrot, I think, is link of such missions with financial institutions. If you are able to address root causes in countries through economic muscle related to those light footprint missions, I think that at least a number of countries where situation is deteriorating would be interested in their deployment. I think it's a missing link. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I know you want to come in, Rosalind, so please do.
By the way, PBC could be in charge of these missions.
Thank you. And there's a lot of, as you see, there's a marketplace of ideas here, and that's also the purpose of this. We won't be able to address all of this. But Rosalind and then Ambassador Skog.
Absolutely, Ambassador, and we at the Peace Building Support Office will be available to support you in that. And Pernilla, I mean, I think it will be an interesting topic to explore further on the lines between peace operations and special political missions and peacekeeping operations. But Eugene and Dirk in the room have done much more work around that, and including on the funding arrangements between whether it's a regular budget or it's a peacekeeping account from. So I think it's much more complicated than just a terminology issue. And I think until member states address some of those things that are fundamental, it's not an issue of a name. It actually goes much more deeper than that. But I think that's something we can discuss in the next Challenges Forum. But actually, I wanted to pick up on a point that Ambassador Skog said, which is really important, and I'm raising it because I think it's fundamental to how we work on prevention, the destigmatization of prevention, and destigmatization, stereotyping of both prevention and peace building. And here, actually, I want to give credit to you, Ambassador, for some of the work that you're already doing in the Peace Building Commission. The fact that there was a session where you had Canada, you had Norway, you had Colombia in one session talking about their efforts at reconciliation and looking at how they work on national peace building is absolutely important, because this is how we deal with the trust issues that Ms. DiCarlo, Under Secretary General DiCarlo, was talking about, that prevention and peace building cannot be seen as things that the global north gives or does to the global south. And until we address that in a genuine way, we will always get opposition whenever we speak about prevention, because when we speak about prevention, then the global south will tell us about SDGs and sustainable development. When we speak about the new agenda for peace, we will be told, but there's the SDG summit. So it's really great what you're already doing in the PBC by actually going at the heart of the problem in many ways. And so it's just to encourage that I think that is the right path. We need to keep going at it. We need to address the issues of mistrust. We need to address the issues of that divide that makes it absolutely difficult for us to work on prevention and peace building. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think there's a lot of truth in that. A lot of the regional dimension can also bridge a lot of the distrust that is in the system. Resources was also mentioned, something that we need to also just address. But Olof, over to you. If you'd
Thank you very much. Yes, so just two reflections having listened to colleagues speak here. One is on resources, precisely. I think, if you see the tremendous budget on peacekeeping, which is, of course, the fire brigade, that comes in because we have failed. Everything else has failed. It's the last step usually of a escalation that we usually can see much earlier, and it's just tremendously costly, right? So I think if we were able to just change again paradigms, to change the paradigm, we would have to invest less there if we were able to invest more in prevention early on. And I'm glad to say that my constituency, the 27 member states, have really warmed up to the fact that we need to add assessed contributions from the UN budget to both African peacekeeping, but also the Peace Building Fund, which is a very good fund, usually struggling with finding the kind of resources. And it's really peanuts compared to what we do on peacekeeping. Second point is, I think, a little bit of forgotten, but very important notion that the Secretary General referred to in his Common Agenda report. It's the social contract idea. Now, we can all put different things into that if we want to, but we can never get away from the fact that a country has or should have a social contract with its citizens. That means that institutions serve the citizens, that there is delivery, sometimes with support from the outside, to the social economic agenda, and that human rights in all its dimensions, political, economic, social, are covered, or at least there is always an effort by the institutions, by the governments to cover that agenda. If we were able to do this better and across the line, I think that would also be a conflict prevention tool that is unmatched. And here is where I see that the UN country teams have a really important role, because no one in the UN's, in the UN system, we could not get a consensus for what would be seen as a violation of sovereignty if the UN, deploy prevention measures, etc. It's going to be very complicated. But if we can change the paradigm again, and I'm glad that Rosalind called it up, this destigmatization, that actually asking for help, having the UN country team in place, the RC and the rest of the team, gender equality experts, human rights experts, UNDPs, etc., to work also in the context of trying to ensure that minorities are protected, that human rights are protected across the board, etc. I think that would be such a boon to what we're trying to achieve here. So don't forget the social contract notion.
Thank you very much also for recognizing some of these thematic experts that play an extremely crucial role in these contexts as well, especially when it comes to women and young girls and children. Also on the constructive side, and that's all, one dimension of this is to recognize these roles, but it's also from the engagement in terms of turning to youth and so on. So these experts, thanks for just also mentioning the needs of this. We are running out of time. It's really difficult sometimes to actually bring in questions when the dialogue is continuing. So what we will do is we'll try to gather questions for this and be able to address it as this discussion somehow moves forward afterwards. So please submit your questions you have. So we will try to, I don't know how, but we can try to build it in a web response or something somehow. But we have a couple of more minutes, and there's been quite a few things has come up. Do you want to comment a little bit, further? Please, Ambassador, start, and then back to you.
Fascinating discussion. Fascinating discussion. We all agree that in the heart of New Agenda for Peace has to be prevention. We have introduced efficient mechanisms when we wanted to improve the observance and respect for human rights. We introduced universal periodic review, where other countries are assessing the respect for human rights of each country. And it's destigmatization because it's universal. It goes for every country because no country is perfect regarding its respect for human rights. So this is UPR. We are, in order to improve implementation of SDGs, we introduced VNR, Voluntary National Review. Well, if we want to improve conflict prevention, why not introduce CPR, Conflict Prevention Review, where countries could demonstrate what they are doing in sense of good practices for conflict prevention, what they do to strengthen resilience of societies from succumbing into conflict. And in addition, it could be a good shop window for mobilizing support for countries in need. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pernilla.
Very short. It brings me to say that we should move away from the firefighters and move ahead to the national rescue committees that should work on preventive measures rather. I mean, I'll really take that conflict prevention reviews with me, and I hope that you will be ready to elaborate further on that. Rosalind, I'm not giving up my DPPA, DPO struggle, but we park it for now. I mean, just maybe I was very quick because I tried to squeeze as much into the few minutes as possible, but just to say, I mean, I don't disagree, but with you, Ambassador, on the missions focusing on prevention. But I think that Ambassador Skog has a valid point. It's very hard, and you know, to get this process through the Security Council and, you know, get them approved and having them deployed. And that's why we had this idea of ad hoc or expert or peace process teams, because they could be an in-house UN resource in one way or another, and they could be deployed quickly to strengthen a resident coordinator or support a UN country team. Just to clarify that, because, you know, I think that's something that we could work on and use more flexible. I mean, I also know that this has internal thing, because sometimes UN senior management is reluctant to involve others, but I think that we could just really work on that. And then, I don't know if we have time, but if we have time, I would like to hear Ambassador speak more about the Sustainable Peace Network that he mentioned earlier.
Thank you very much. And I wish we had that time, and we don't, but Rosalind, it would be unfair not to just... So, absolutely. So just a very, very, very short reply, and then we will actually close the session.
No, mine is really just actually first to thank all of you, but also to throw a challenge to the academics, because that's why you have all the big brains. You know, there are issues that we need to figure out. I think we're very good at the UN. I think I can say we are good at being able to analyze where the problems are and what the issues are. I think it would be really great if we can come back. You know, not come back, but go to Japan next year, where you have your next session, and hear from you on what are some of the ways we can move that new agenda for peace forward, so that we can put some pegs already for, you know, the next turn of any reforms that the UN has, so that we can look back and say, when we sat here in 2023, we showed you where we were with the new agenda for peace, and now we are giving you some ways in which, based on data, based on evidence, based on our research, based on our big brains, these are some of the solutions. So mine is really to throw the challenge and say, would really, really appreciate if we can get some thinking from you on actually what we can do given the challenges that we all face. Thank you.
Ambassador Skog, since you're not here, I still feel like I just want, yeah, good. Thank you very much. With that, I think this very much summarizes actually a little bit about the idea of ACUNS. We're not here to create consensus here. We're here to create ideas. We're also here to call out on researchers for more information. We need a lot more understanding and knowledge and facts about these issues. As was laid out also, there's an interesting road ahead. We have the upcoming SDG summit, and there will be painful experiences and sort of results that we have to take into consideration, and that will move this agenda forward as well. We have the General Assembly and with ministerial meetings planned to address some of these issues. More importantly, we're moving into the next year on the Summit of the Future. The year after that will be the mandated reviews of both the peace-building architecture and peace operations. We need facts, more experts that actually provide input to this. And I think that's sort of the whole idea with this. I'd like to thank you so much for providing very useful, thought-provoking in many ways. I wish I could have commented on this for the 37th ACUNS meeting. I have a lot of questions, so I'm happy to convey them into that meeting. So please join me in thanking sort of all the good ideas that have come out by our presenters. And I would also like to call up Lise Howard and thank you.
Thank you so much, Henrik.
Fantastic.
Yes, lovely. And thank you, everyone, for coming. Our final housekeeping notes of today. So keep your badges for tomorrow. I hope to see you back here bright and early at 7:30 a.m. for breakfast, a little bit later if you want to skip it, but I will be here if you are here. And for now, we can continue this conversation. If you have your questions, come join us for a drink out in the Great Hall. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.